The Shaping Opinion podcast is brought to you by O'Brien Communications, an independent corporate communications firm. O'Brien Communications helps clients of all sizes with corporate communications and strategic planning, marketing communications, public relations and media relations, content development and writing, and crisis and issues management. Learn more at o'briencommunications.com. Dr. Collins, you played baseball. Have you ever had a concussion?
Interestingly, no. I've never had one. And I know that sounds a little funny because this is what I do all day, every day. And some patients actually ask that question. They say, have you ever had this injury? And I say, no, I haven't. I've heard it a lot. I've dealt with it a lot. And some patients will actually say, well, how can you understand what I'm going through then? Because there's so many, it's a very intangible, hard to describe, cryptic kind of set of symptoms that these patients go through. And a lot of times they feel like they're on an island with it. And so for them to describe the injury, it's difficult for them. So I almost feel like sometimes if I had a concussion, it would have been advantageous to my job, but I'm glad I didn't.
I'm Tim O'Brien. In this episode of the Shaping Opinion podcast, we're joined by Dr. Michael Collins, also known as Dr. Micky Collins. He's recognized around the world as an expert on sports-related concussion. He's been involved in many of the advances that have taken place in recent years on how concussions are diagnosed and treated. The premise of our podcast is simple. We talk about people, events, and things that have shaped the way we think. Today we're going to talk with Dr. Collins about his work and how widespread education and awareness have influenced participation levels in all sports at all levels, and most importantly, the way athletes participate. According to the UPMC Sports Medicine Concussion Program, between 1.7 and 3 million sports-related concussions happen each year. Around 300,000 of those are football-related. 5 of 10 concussions go unreported or undetected. 2 in 10 high school athletes who play contact sports, including soccer and lacrosse, will suffer a concussion this year. Girls soccer sees the second most concussions of all high school sports. Girls basketball sees the third most. The UPMC Sports Medicine Concussion Program sees more than 17,000 patients each year. About 70% of those are high school aged. The National Federation of High School Associations reports that while sports participation is up across all sports, both boys and girls, 11-player football participation is down. Youth football organizations are seeing similar declines. Anecdotally, coaches and youth league officials say there are a lot of reasons, like less parental involvement in the operations of sports leagues and teams, the emergence of fall baseball, year-round basketball leagues, hockey, and lacrosse, and more non-sports activities. Still, most will say a big factor for the decline is the growing concern about head injuries. They see the media reports about former NFL players who are diagnosed with CTE, the degenerative brain disease, and they see a good deal more media attention about the issue. And when they watch the pros and college football on television, they see the care and attention to concussions is more noticeable. With these concerns in mind, they are rethinking football. Dr. Collins, you've been one of those people behind the formation of the UPMC Sports Medicine Concussion Program. It's the first and largest research clinical program focused on the diagnosis, evaluation, and management of sports-related concussions. Can you tell us how you identified the need for the program and your involvement in that?
Yeah, it was interesting. Truth be told, when I started doing this, not many people cared about it. In fact, I remember walking to dinner with my wife in around 1997, and I told her, and I was studying this at the time, and I said, honey, I love what I do. I'm really excited about the concussion stuff and sports, and it kind of brings my two passions together. But how am I ever going to make a living doing this? And I actually said that to her. And she said, well, you got to stick with it. It's your passion. It's what you love to do. Just stay with it and see where it goes. And little did I know that the pendulum would swing so widely with this injury. It's not long ago that there was very little regard and little care for this injury. Now I think the pendulum has perhaps swung a little too far, and I think the truth is in between. It's not as bad as what it's being made out to be, and it's worse than maybe what we thought 15 years ago. So I'm trying every day to identify the truth and identify the science and really move the field forward, and that's what we've been doing here for 18 years.
Can you explain why you think the pendulum has moved too far?
Yeah, I awareness with no solution is called hysteria, and we see that there's a lot of awareness of this injury. The media and rightfully so has really called attention to this issue, and scientists have called attention to this issue, and it's very exciting because again, when I started doing this job in 2000, which is when I came to UPMC. We weren't seeing many patients. There wasn't much interest in our research, and all of a sudden, it's just we see this accelerate. The reality is that there's a lot of misinformation out there about concussion. The great majority of kids that I see come through this clinic, and we have thousands of patients come through here, is we can get them back to the sports they love. This is a treatable injury, and we agree upon that. There are great advances in terms of how we evaluate, assess, treat, and rehab this injury. That's what's exciting right now is the progress being made and how we actually get kids to be symptom-free sooner than they used to get to be symptom-free and getting them back to play. And we have good outcomes. And I don't know if the public is fully aware that this is a treatable injury, and we see kids get better from this every day, all day, and we get them back to the sports they love.
What kind of obstacles did you face when you were first trying to get the program started and you knew what you were trying to do, but it may not necessarily have been happening fast enough for you?
I've been very blessed to be in a department, in a system, in an organization that has provided incredible support. I work in the Department of Orthopedic Surgery at UPMC, and from the top down, UPMC has been incredibly supportive of this program. My chairman, Dr. Freddie Fu, has been supportive. So I never felt pressure. Early on, I was always given support, and they believed in what we were doing, which is, I don't know how many people can say that. I just feel very fortunate in that respect. So I never felt pressure. I felt internal pressure. I wanted to make sure that we were doing the right type of research. I wanted to make sure that we were building the clinic the right way, and making sure we trying to learn more about this injury, the phenomenology of the injury, and really this was an academic mission at first in terms of just understanding what is concussion. There was very little research out there about it. There was very little discussion of it. But it was, I don't know why, but it was very intriguing to me from the beginning, and just learning about the injury and what is actually happening and why are the patients feeling what they're feeling and how can we measure it, who's more at risk, how long does it take to recover, how can we speed up recovery, how, just really trying to put our arms around this injury is where this all began. And I think that passion of every day I come to work, I learn something else about this injury, and it never ends. It's a day-to-day process that I really enjoy.
Having been around the game of football myself, I saw it myself during this period of time. What kind of reaction or even possibly resistance did you get from coaches or trainers or people on the sports side of the injury that may not have wanted to go along with this?
Yeah, it's very interesting. When we started this, Dr. Mark Lovell and myself were really the two guys that started this program, and Joe Maroon. When we started this program, I had to argue about getting kids to stay out of play. It was quite remarkable thinking back on some of the anecdotes and experiences I had where I told an athlete, listen, your data is off of normal. You're having these symptoms that we know put you more at risk for another injury to happen. And yeah, we need to get you out of play at this point in time to give you the period of time to recover. And I would get absolute kickback from the parents, from the player. I remember some kind of humorous, actually interesting anecdotes about that, about kids throwing a temper tantrum about it, or parents, basically not believing what I was telling them and wanting their kids to get back to play. And that's what happened in circa 2000 to 2006. And now I literally have to talk parents into letting their kids get back to sports a lot of the time. And that's 10 years later. And so the pendulum has swung. And I find myself actually wanting that, telling the parents, look, your child is safe to get back to play. And I feel very comfortable that they're ready to get back to play. And if they have another injury, we can treat it and manage it, and everything's going to be okay. And that's actually the more difficult conversation now. It's a 180-degree opposite of what it used to be.
Can you give us an example almost? I'd almost ask you for two stories here. Can you tell me a story about the before, when people wanted their kids to play, and maybe another story about how a parent might be now, one of those anecdotes?
Yeah, so I would say that before I would have parents, and this isn't, and most parents, 90% of the kids I saw, the parents were very appreciative and agreed with my assessment and, et cetera. So it went very smoothly. But I do remember a couple cases where the parents would disagree with me and take their kids to some other clinician, and they get back to play, and I'd see them 2 or 3 weeks later after they had another injury, and the parents would come in and apologize to me because they went back to play too soon. And they were very adamant that their child was normal, and they weren't normal. We know that if you're not normal from this injury, the chances of having another injury are significant, and that's when the outcomes can get a little murky. We got to be very careful of putting kids back to play too soon. Now, on the flip side of that, recently I've had parents whose children, for example, the primary profile is anxiety, and the child is having a lot of, and there's really, sometimes the concussion can lead to some anxiety in some kids. The concussion heals, and we see some anxiety that persists, and the best thing to treat anxiety is exercise and exposure and returning to normal activity. And the anxiety is causing symptoms in the child, and the best thing we can do is get them back to sports, and holding kids out of play. There's physiologic consequences of anxiety as well, and not letting kids play sports and run around and be with their friends and have an outlet for that stress, it can be very deleterious to their health. And so, outlining that to the parent and saying, look, your child's having headaches not because of concussion, it's because of stress. And we see a lot of that in our clinic. And I think sports are just a wonderful outlet for kids. It teaches them a lot of very important skills, and there's a lot of health consequences of not being active as well. And so we face that battle now all the time. I'd say we face that battle more now than we faced the other battle, 10 years ago.
What's your approach? It seems like public education is as much a part of your job as anything.
Yeah, I believe in. My job is really kind of detective work, trying to find out where the aberrant signal is coming from. I mean, the child or patient comes to me, they're not feeling well, and it's my job to figure out why. And is it related to the concussion? Is it not? And how do we get them better? And so I am on a mission every day to figure out what's going on and get these kids healthy. And we do it a lot here. We have 18 to 20,000 patient visits a year. But I am really confident at this point in time, if you have a child that has a concussion and they bring them to our clinic, we're going to be able to tell you yes or no, they had a concussion. This is the type of concussion they had. This is the amount of time we expect to take it to recover till we get them back to play. This is the type of rehab we're going to do. This is the type of exercise we're going to do. And yeah, we're going to be able to get you healthy and get you back to the sport you love. I can have that conversation now with parents in a very confident way and walk them through the process, and the parents can watch their kids get better and get back to the sport they love. We really are making incredible improvements in terms of how we can do this effectively and get kids back, get kids healthy and get them back to sports.
One of the interesting things that I thought you said, you were describing the 6 types of concussions. And when you went through those 6 types of concussions, you talked about, in the context of that, you talked about the treatment and how the conventional thinking of just rest may not always be the right treatment for certain types of concussions. Can you summarize those 6 types and why sometimes it's more important to get an athlete back on the field or on the court?
Yes, absolutely. So we've identified our program, and we've been doing a lot of work on this. We've identified 6 different types of concussions. At the end of the day, concussion is an energy problem, and depends on what system decompensates from the energy crisis, which causes different types of problems following an injury. But the 6 different types of concussion are cognitive or thinking problems, vestibular deficits, which is a part of the brain that allows us to interpret movement, motion, stabilize our vision when we move our head, allows us to balance. It's kind of our internal gyroscope, if you will, but it also allows us to sort of interpret busy environments and movement. The third type of concussion is ocular motor, which is your ability of your eyes to work together as a team. It's not vision per se, it's more eye movement. It's, following a target, moving your eyes from target to target, converging your vision, diverging your vision, accommodating your vision. The fourth type of concussion is migraine, which is what it sounds like, headache with light and noise sensitivity. The fifth type of concussion is cervical issues or neck issues. And the sixth subtype is anxiety or mood-related issues. Now, if you think about those 6 different types of concussions as interlocking circles, you may have a patient that has one type of concussion, and then you may have a patient that has all 6. These are not mutually exclusive. In fact, there are very strong associations between these circles. For example, patients with vestibular dysfunction, we find that they're more likely to be anxious. We think there's some involvement with the sympathetic nervous system and sort of autonomic arousal. So patients that have vestibular deficits, they will have this sort of fight or flight response, increased sort of anxiety, if you will, stress, and so you got to be careful. And I could point out other relationships. There's relationships between migraine and stress. There's relationships between stress and oculomotor problems. There's a relationship between cognitive issues and problems with migraine, for example. There's very strong associations between these circles. So long story short is for each of these circles, we have completely different treatments, and most of them involve activity. For example, if you have a vestibular issue, the only way to treat that is by exposure. It's not by rest. You actually have to retrain that system. So if a patient comes to me and there's an isolated vestibular problem, guess what? I'm not resting them. I'm exposing them. I'm putting them back into environments that make that it's provocative for them. I want them to expose, recover, and that's how you can treat the problem. Now, if you expose too little, you don't get better. And if you expose a vestibular problem too hard, you actually get migraine. So there's a sweet spot there. And you got to be aware of where the system's breaking down and then put them in certain environments or expose them to certain physical activities. And you can treat it in a very targeted way by doing certain movements. Now, to further complicate this, there's probably 15, 20 different types of vestibular problems and 15 or 20 different types of oculomotor problems. And, so there's complexity within those circles as well. But the long story short is very few patients I quote unquote rest following concussion now. I will prescribe certain exercises and certain movements. And we know, for example, with migraine, patients that exercise actually benefit from exercise with migraine. We know patients that with migraine benefit from reducing their anxiety, which in exercise helps reduce anxiety. Now, if you have a full-blown migraine, you may want to rest those patients to some extent, but I'm never going to tell patients to take naps. I'm never going to tell patients to sleep all day. I'm never going to tell patients to, stop doing all their activities. I want them walking. I want them being active. It just has to be done in a prescribed way. So this whole sort of, you have a concussion, do nothing philosophy that doesn't work in our clinic. We have to figure out what type of concussion the patient has and then target that with specific activities and treatments.
One of the most amazing tools that you have that I thought was your impact testing in the early days. Can you describe some of the tools you use to diagnose concussions?
Yeah, impact continues to be the cornerstone of our assessment as it relates to concussion. Impact is a computerized neurocognitive test that was developed in the mid-1990s and has changed mildly in some ways over time. But long story short is this was developed by Mark Lovell, who's my mentor, Joe Maroon, who's a team neurosurgeon for the Steelers and is here at UPMC with me and myself. I'm a co-developer as well. That tool, we started using that in 2000 or so, or a little before, and we started baseline testing with that tool. It's about a 20 to 25 minute battery of tests on a computer. It assesses, reaction time, cognitive processes, visual motor processes, memory, attention. It's a very difficult test, and we were very lucky to fall into UPMC, where all these different schools, we have athletic trainers. Western PA is one of the best places in the country for athletic training, and we rolled out this program, and it started, implementing in other places, and now, 18 years later, I don't know how many millions and millions and millions of kids and across the world have taken that test, and it's become very widely implemented across all different sports leagues, not only nationally but internationally. And it's a valuable tool. In fact, it's the first tool that's been approved by the FDA to measure concussion, and we received that approval about 2 years ago. So it's been a success story for sure, and it's helped countless kids. But at the end of the day, it's a tool. And we've realized that with these different types of concussions, we have to measure the injury in a very comprehensive way. And impact, we find that there's different profiles of data on that tool as it relates to these different types of concussions, and we've done a lot of research on that. For example, patients with a certain type of concussion may have a totally different profile than other types of concussion on that test. So it helps us identify what's going on. But we also augment that testing with looking at the vestibular system and also looking at the oculomotor system. We've developed a new tool. It's a 5-minute physical exam called the VOMS, which stands for Vestibular Oculomotor Screening. That's also developed here at UPMC and is now being used across the world as well. So we've learned more, we've augmented our armamentarium or how we assess this injury. We use exertion to assess the injury. We obviously do a very detailed interview to find out about the symptoms. We look at eye movements and your ability to stabilize your vision when you move your head. And we look at something called dynamic visual acuity, which is you move your head and you have to look at a target and kind of see if you can keep the target in focus. There's a lot of different things that we've developed that allows us to assess this injury in a comprehensive way, because at the end of the day, there's no biomarker for concussion. There's no blood test. There's no serum marker. There's no image. We don't see concussion on MRI or CT or PET or functional MRI or MEG. We don't have this simple blood test, and there's a lot of talk about that, but we've been looking for that for Alzheimer's disease for 40 years and haven't found that either. I think for people that think there's going to be this blood test for concussion around the corner, I just don't see that happening. It's going to take a really good clinical evaluation to manage this injury, and that's what we've specialized in here at UPMC and what we're very good at.
What do you see as the future realistically for your research and for concussions?
Realistically, I see the future as proving our efficacy in treatment through randomized controlled trials, multidisciplinary, multi-institutional work that allows us to understand the dosing and timing of treatments and when to apply treatments, and proving that concussion is a treatable injury and showing that the outcomes are good and allowing kids to get back to play safely and allowing the public to understand that we have made advances and we can get kids back to play in a healthy way. And I don't want parents to feel guilty about their kids playing sports, whether it be football or soccer or hockey or wrestling. I think that's, for me, is a very realistic goal that we're working on. I think there's a lot of misinformation about concussion. Again, I feel that I'm very confident that if you bring your child to our clinic, we're going to treat him up and get him healthy. And I'm very confident on that because we've made so much progress. But now we have to disseminate how we do that to the rest of the world, and through science is the way it's done. And science takes time; it doesn't happen overnight. We've published over 250 papers as part of our program. I mean, we research, we've written books, we've given lectures across the world on this stuff. It doesn't happen overnight; it takes time.
And that's the great thing about science, is it's a process. And I think there's a lot of like-minded people across the world thinking the same way we are about the injury now, and now it's time to come together and to benefit the population with this injury. Because at the end of the day, there's 1.8 to 3.6 million kids in this country having concussions per year in sports and recreation alone. It's a very frequent injury.
Let's say that you had a son who wanted to play football. Would you let him play football?
Yes, I would. Absolutely. I would feel comfortable with that. Number one, I'm their dad, so if there's a concussion, I'm going to be able to treat it. But I'll give you a story. I have 4 daughters. They're all very active, and 3 out of my 4 children have had a concussion. In fact, one of my daughters this year had a pretty significant concussion playing soccer. I wasn't there at the day, and she got hit with a soccer ball from very close range. She fell to the ground. She stumbled when she got up. She was confused. She went to the sideline, and the coach asked her some very basic questions. And my daughter, who is very spirited athlete, answered those questions. And the coach asked, "How do you feel?" And my daughter said, "Fine." And they put her back to play. And she went back in 5 minutes after this, or 10 minutes after the event, and she ended up throwing up on the car ride home. She ended up having all kinds of issues after this injury, and I was very upset about this, as you might imagine. You don't put kids back to play when there's an injury like this. And we applied every possible, I got her. I saw her that night. I wish I'd been at the game, because this would have not happened. But regardless, saw her. I was able to identify what type of concussion she had. We applied all the treatments very quickly, aggressively, and she was completely healthy within about a week and a half. And we had her back playing sports, and she's done incredibly well since. There's been no issues. It scared the heck out of me as a parent. It was a whole different ballgame when it's your daughter. And but I felt confident. I felt very confident in how we were approaching the injury. So I know that's sort of a long-winded story, but the reality is this injury can happen in any sport. It happens. I think if you follow me for a day in clinic, you'd be shocked at how many patients I see from playground accidents or bike riding accidents or cheerleading or whatever the activity is. This is not a football-specific injury. It happens across all sports and recreation, but regardless, yes, I would let my son, if I had one, play football. I would treat it like I treated my daughter, and I feel very comfortable that we're able to treat this injury effectively and get kids back to these sports. And that's, when we're going to we're proving that every day in our clinic, and we're going to continue to improve it through science and really show through research that this is a treatable event.
Dr. Micky Collins, thank you for joining us today.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Make sure to check out our show notes for more information on everything that we talked about today. You'll find a bio on our guest today, Dr. Micky Collins, and the groundbreaking work that he has done with the UPMC Sports Medicine Concussion Program and other information on sports concussions. You can also listen to other episodes, and don't miss our next episode. You can subscribe to the Shaping Opinion podcast in many ways, and they're all free and easy to find on your favorite podcast channel and at shapingopinion.com. This is where we talk about people, events, and things that have shaped the way we think. Until next time, I'm Tim O'Brien.